Zionism is a violent ideology to its core, and you might have heard a new word being thrown around, liberal Zionism. But what does it mean? Is it any better than the term we've already stigmatized, Zionism? The answer is, of course, it's not. But I want to respond to some of the recent liberal Zionist propaganda I've seen, highlight some of the strategies they're using, and respond to exactly what they're trying to hide. And so first, I think we should prime the problem liberal Zionism is addressing. Liberal Zionism is a response to exactly the same things as anti-Zionism, but it is a capitulatory, it is a reformist, it is a self-reassertion of the system approach. This is what they are responding to.
We need to kill all the people in Tel and Sarah, even Jit and Farata. Why? Because we don't want it to happen again.
It sounds like you're saying one Jewish life is worth hundreds or thousands of Palestinian lives.
Not million.
That is the supremacist ideology that millions of people across the world are seeing and are rightfully being disgusted by. That is a West Bank settler justifying the extreme violence that is inherent in Zionism. And everyone is saying this shit is evil. This is horrendous. We must do something about it. And there are kind of two responses that an Israeli who wants to maintain the system of apartheid, of genocide, that Zionism necessitates, because we will remind you, Zionism, it is a colonial ideology of Palestine in that area. They need to maintain that system. And there are two responses. One, you can agree with this guy. You can say, yes, the best way to maintain an apartheid genocidal system is to complete the genocide, to complete the apartheid. That is the Ben-Gvir approach. It's the Benjamin Netanyahu approach. But there's a second approach, which is liberal Zionism, to say, I agree, that's horrendous, or at the very least, as they say to each other, well, that's bad propaganda. That makes us look bad. We need to stop saying that, or we need to change a little bit of the optics to make it not quite as bad. And they do this a lot of different ways. But one of the ways that liberal Zionists distract, divert, and disperse anti-Israel sentiment that builds up properly and predictably is things like this. This Haaretz article says Americans don't have an Israel problem, they have a Netanyahu problem. And I think it shows the first really strong strategy of liberal Zionists, which is to, instead of taking the rightful anti-Israel, anti-Zionist push that comes from the disgusting videos we are seeing, it says, no, it's not an Israel problem, it's a Netanyahu problem. It's this government problem. It's just those settlers. Rather than asking, why is Netanyahu popular? What system enabled and continues to enable the West Bank? What system enabled and continues to enable liberal Zionists to support the IDF and support the genocide being committed? And the answer is this type of focus, just on Netanyahu's unequivocally evil, helps maintain or distract from that overarching system. And I want to point to this clip that I saw of liberal Zionists speaking to each other and Cory Booker going even further into this strategy in a very interesting way.
Want to call Benjamin Netanyahu, say, a war criminal. What happens if you do? What changes by just saying, I believe Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal, and that signals what our sort of moral parameters are for the kind of leadership in Israel we view as acceptable?
This is not a political test for me. Benjamin Netanyahu is a horrible person who enabled October 7th and has failed to take accountability. Remember, he knew about the Qataris funding this horrific terrorist organization, Hamas. He knew about that.
So I just want to track that conversation for a second, because the question is, why don't you set this as the moral bar to maintaining the Israeli state? Benjamin Netanyahu, a person that obviously represents maybe slightly further right-wing tendencies than most Israelis, even though he is quite popular. And then Cory Booker does a really interesting thing where he says, not only will I not do that, not only do I disagree with you that that's how we maintain the genocidal state, but actually, the only primary crime that Benjamin Netanyahu has committed is enabling, allegedly, Palestinian resistance to the violence that I'm going to ignore against Palestinians. And this is deeply dehumanizing, to frame the only crime of a genocidaire possibly enabling, not quite strangling the genocided people enough to allow them to resist. That is a new level of liberal Zionism. And so that hits trope 2. They are just as dehumanizing to Palestinians. They are just as patronizing to Palestinians. But they do so in a way that says, okay, we agree that their harm is bad. We agree that the system is horrendous. We're just not going to do anything about it. And that gets us to the thing that happens when you ask liberal Zionists, well, what should we do about the right-wingers? And Jack Schlossberg offers a very, clear response to this. Jack Schlossberg recently posted, "Many were influenced by paid fake media campaigns labeling me a Zionist, supporter of Israel's conduct in Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon, elsewhere. Lies." And he says, "I vowed to end all weapons assistance to Israel." But did you, Jack? Is that what you did?
Been out of control. I am against sending offensive weapons to Israel. I am for funding the Iron Dome.
Operative word there, Jack. Offensive. You still want to send defensive weaponry. That's like if we looked at a school shooter and you said, obviously I disagree with what he's doing, but we should give him a shield, and why would we send the police in? You don't actually want to undermine this system, and every single thing a liberal Zionist will say will demonstrate that. It is not about undermining the system. It is about giving the minimum visual compromises so that all of this anger we have against Israel, all of this anger we have against the genocide and apartheid can be redirected from actually critically analyzing the system that created it to just changing the face of it. Because defensive weaponry, if you're going to send out defensive weaponry to that area, why don't you send it to the resistance? They have civilians as well. Israel's murdering thousands of their civilians. If you actually cared, if you actually disagreed with the far right-wing ideology that you claim to disagree with, then you would be sending defense to the people that far right-wing ideology is murdering, not sending defensive weaponry to the people currently in charge of that genocidal state. So even the solutions of liberal Zionists, not only is it disingenuous, obviously, to isolate this issue down just to Netanyahu. As we saw, there are thousands of settlers that agree with Netanyahu, and there are millions of Israelis that continue to go join the IDF, go participate in Israeli civil society and the genocide that they're committing. It is disingenuous to say it is just Netanyahu, but even the solutions they support or are willing to support demonstrate they don't actually think this is the problem. Because if they believed even it was just the far right-wing government of Netanyahu or the upcoming far right-wing government that might meet Netanyahu, they would take real actions, not only to slowly decrease support, but actually resist it. That demonstrates to you what their project is. It is not to challenge the genocide or the genocidal system. It is to re-support it by making it look just a little bit nicer. Their argument to right-wingers is not that they're wrong or that they're evil, but that they make the wrong, evil project that they both agree on look bad. And this is once again clear because Jack Schlossberg, no matter how much he says, only people who were influenced by paid fake media would label him a Zionist. It is his own words that refuse to say a free Palestine.
Why should we vote for you?
We got to get money out of politics. I do not have a super PAC, a corporate PAC, and I don't take money from AI companies. We will never have no kings as long as billionaires can buy elections.
Can you say free Palestine?
What? I'm not going to say.
Why can't you say free Palestine?
Because that's not what we're here for.
So what are we here for? Can you say fuck Israel, Jack?
No way, dude.
Wait, but you just said
Jewish.
you can't. Well, fuck Israel.
The anti-Semitic conflation of him being Jewish and being unable to condemn a genocidal state is exactly the ideology that the right wing used to justify that very genocide. It is absurd. Liberal Zionists will say they disagree with this ideology, but then support the very foundation of it. So that is fundamentally what liberal Zionism is. It is a system by which the anger, the populist response, the fury that people feel from videos like this, where someone is advocating with the aid and abet of the IDF to have no Arabs in Gaza. An area, by the way, that was not even historically included in what they claim as their national origin of the Kingdom of Israel. And here is the IDF supporting this protest by handing waters and allowing them directly next to the border fence. Liberal Zionism looks at that and tries to convince you, who is angry about that it's not a systemic problem. It's not an Israel problem. It's not a problem we need to both defund and militantly work against. It's not a problem we need to fund the resistance to. But it'll be solved if we just change the face of it. The millions of Israelis that support the illegal settlements, the millions of Israelis that support the genocide, the millions of Israelis that have served in the IDF committing the genocide, they're not the problem. It's just a few small, somehow very popular, somehow very powerful, far right-wing organizations that are doing this. And this is done in a lot of different ways, from hyper-focusing on Netanyahu to saying the only crime of Netanyahu was that he somehow helped Palestinian resistance, not that he violently and destructively committed a genocide against the Palestinians, to a very interesting narrative that I want to leave off here, which is the one from JStreet.
Trump, Ben-Gvir, and a crocodile have in common. Unfortunately, more than you'd think. Trump, Ben-Gvir, and a crocodile have in common. Unfortunately, more than you'd think. Here's what happened.
They go on to explain how Ben-Gvir supports a prison for Palestinians with crocodiles around it and that he was inspired by alligator Alcatraz. But JStreet, this particular one, doesn't go too heinously. It recognizes the horrendous conditions and horrendous treatment of Palestinian detainees by the Israeli government. But this narrative, which is comparing Ben-Gvir to Donald Trump, is very, very interesting because at no point have they ever compared the war criminals that are currently running against Netanyahu to Kamala. But that would be accurate. That would be accurate because the war criminals that are running against Netanyahu right now also helped commit genocide in Lebanon. They brag about it. The war criminals that are running against Netanyahu also support the continued occupation across Israel proper and across the West Bank. The difference is not actually judging the system. The difference is how loudly we commit that violence. Do we lie about it? Do we put the body cams on the cops? Do we make lies about how or why we want to invade Iran, or do we just openly do it? And so the comparison to Trump is very accurate, and I appreciate JStreet for making it. Not because Benjamin Netanyahu is some new, random, isolated aberration of Israeli society, but because just like all other fascists, juxtaposed with liberals, they are perfectly in line with the very system that liberals support. And liberal Zionism, just like liberal American politics, does not serve to threaten that system, but it serves to capitulate to it and offer a false alternative to it. Liberal Zionism is no better. And I think we make a mistake when we say that liberal Zionism is no different. It is, but the difference is important. Instead of saying we should infinitely escalate violence, we should infinitely complete the genocide, liberal Zionists recognize the pragmatic reality, which is that Israel has limited power, limited funds, limited support. And at some points, you need to do effective propaganda to regain that power, regain that support. And that includes lying about your intentions. And just like Jack Schlossberg will never say free Palestine and never want to fund the resistance of Palestinians while saying that he is against the very thing they are resisting, while saying he's against the very far right wing. And so the debate is never, how do we undermine this system? The answer is obvious. You actually cease all funding to the genocidal state and engage in effective militant resistance. That's because the debate, just like within America, is never how do we deconstruct the American empire? How do we deconstruct the genocidal state of the United States? But it is, how do we maintain it? And the liberals are saying we need to calm down. We need to slow down. Not because I worry about the extreme, horrendous human cost of our violence, but because if you continue at the rate and scale and openness, you will threaten our ability to continue it. Israelis are saying the same thing. Not that we care about Palestinians, even though it might be dressed up in those words, but they obviously don't mean it because they're not willing or able to undermine the very systems that violence is coming out of.